The war in Ukraine has already lasted longer than World War I. More than 1.3 million Russian soldiers have been taken out. This is more than the total strength of the entire Russian army before the full-scale invasion. Out of those, 500,000 have been killed. This is significantly more than the USSR lost in Afghanistan or the US lost in Vietnam. It is nearly as many as those who died on both sides in the Iran-Iraq War, which dragged on for almost 8 years. How is this even possible in the 21st century? Western analysts say that most of the Russian army's equipment and manpower has been destroyed specifically by Allied weapons. The Kremlin, in response, claims that Russian forces go through Western armor like butter. Therefore, they argue, these weapons do not affect the course of the battle, and their losses are moderate. But what is the reality? What is happening on the front lines right now can be described as a death conveyor. The Russians assault in small groups, while the Ukrainians set up a kill zone right in their path. We are talking about pre-sighted and mined areas of terrain where enemy movement is expected. As soon as a recon drone spots a target, a timer starts ticking. In less than a minute, FPVs carrying explosives launch into the sky. At night, these are thermal-equipped FPVs, which also carry explosives. Who is supplying these little killers? It is not the US, and it is not Europe. While at the start of the war, components came from Asia, today a significant portion of production has been localized right inside Ukraine. This is a network of hundreds of private companies and startups across the country, churning them out on a scale of millions. In 2025, the Ukrainian army received over 3 million FPVs. But in 2026, this number could rise to 8 million, and even, according to Zelensky, up to 10 million, provided there is funding from the Allies. This means there are several FPVs for every single Russian soldier on the front line. Russian propagandists are in absolute shock.
This sounds very unpleasant, but when we send a truckload of soldiers to the front, the Ukrainians receive a truckload of FPVs.
When the destroy in 60 seconds game begins, the outcome is almost always fatal. This exact method is how 60 to 80% of Russian soldiers are being eliminated today. FPVs are the primary weapon. However, most Russian soldiers did not die from drones. They were killed long before the drone era even started. To understand where these 500,000 dead came from, we need to go back in time.
First, we wiped out their most well-trained forces, and then they sent us the losers. Most of them are just cannon fodder.
Prior to the drone era, which kicked off in 2024 with the creation of the world's first independent drone branch, up to 80% of all Russian army losses in this war came from Ukrainian artillery strikes. The first weeks of the war, the aerial blitzkrieg failed, but the Russians still believed in a ground blitzkrieg. In European capitals, pessimism reigned, with many believing Ukraine was doomed. Russian tank columns roll forward as if they are on a parade. Ukrainian artillery is already waiting for them, but there are no M777s, PZH-2000s, or Archers yet. These are mostly Soviet-era guns and MLRSs, yet the accuracy is insane. How is this possible? And this is where things get interesting. Ukrainian artillerymen managed to double their accuracy compared to previous wars, thanks to reconnaissance and speed of deployment. They launched Ukrainian Furia drone systems into the sky, and even ordinary civilian Mavics. Target data was instantly entered into Kropiva, a tablet and smartphone app that even raw recruits could operate. And this completely revolutionized reaction times and fire correction. On screen, Kropiva looks like interactive maps of the tactical situation, displaying enemy positions and friendly forces. It links drones, reconnaissance teams, and artillery into a single network, cutting the time from target detection to fire mission to just seconds. The built-in ballistic calculator instantly computes fire parameters for any gun and any shell type. The result? The Russian Ministry of Defense claimed 1,351 of their soldiers were killed in the first month of fighting. OSINT researchers estimated 16,000. What was the actual reality? The Russian 1st Tank Army suffers a total rout in February to March 2022 and rolls back to replenish its personnel. The Russian 35th Combined Arms Army is bled white. In some of the Army's motor rifle brigades, fewer than 100 combat-ready soldiers remain, and that is just the first month of the war. The Russian 200th Separate Motor Rifle Brigade loses most of its combat-ready strength and urgently receives several hundred civilian reservists. The 22nd and 3rd Special Forces Brigades lose up to half of their personnel due to orders to act as ordinary infantry. This is far from a complete list. But one thing is clear: the Russian tactics completely failed. There is even a casualty champion among the Russian brigades and armies. Who exactly? A little patience, my friends. For now, we are interested in whether Western weapons took part in the massacre of those first few weeks.
You know what I gave them? I gave them javelins, and the javelins were very effective, as you know. I gave them nothing.
Not only javelins, but also the British-Swedish laws, which scorched Russian columns, became the primary Western weapons at the start of the war. Small Ukrainian mobile groups destroyed tanks and BMPs in cities and heavily forested areas. At the same time, the Turkish Bayraktar TB2 UAVs became the symbol of Ukrainian resistance, taking out air defense systems, fuel columns, and armor from the air. But their contribution to total Russian losses was only a few percent. The bulk of the work was done by old Soviet artillery, but that was only the beginning of the war. Once the Russian plans for a quick land grab were shattered, the second phase of the war began, where Western weapons started playing a much more prominent role. Summer 2022. Ukraine receives long-range Caesars, German PZH-2000s, and American M777s. The results come just 2 months later, during the Kharkiv counteroffensive in September 2022. First, the M777s systematically pound Russian bunkers and firing points. Thanks to Western radar systems, they also detect and destroy Russian artillery before it can even reach Ukrainian positions. The Russian guns simply lack the range. This Ukrainian advantage secures a breakthrough in the Russian defense. Once the line ruptured, mobile SPGs entered the game. They moved alongside the advancing troops, providing continuous fire support. The Western SPGs also hammered the retreating Russian columns. It was a cascading collapse of the front. The Russians abandoned over 300 pieces of equipment. Personnel losses in just a few days were at least 2,000 killed alone. But that was just a warm-up. No less iconic was the southern counteroffensive and the liberation of Kherson. This was not a breakthrough, but a war of attrition. What was the role of Western weapons here? Unlike in the Kharkiv region, the Russians here had prepared a deep, multi-layered defense consisting of airborne units, so the fighting dragged on for several months. Then, the Russian General Staff announced a so-called difficult decision.
Маневр будет осуществлен в ближайшие сроки.
And withdrew their forces. What happened? The primary role was played by the HIMARS systems, but they did not target manpower. Instead, they struck bridges across the Dnipro River and ammo depots deep in the rear. In doing so, HIMARS cut off the Russian grouping from ammunition and fuel supplies. Facing the threat of total destruction, the Russians retreated, avoiding massive casualties. However, this marked the beginning of the meat assault era, as the Russian army received massive reinforcements from mobilization and recruitment, including from prisons. It was during this stage of the war that the Russians died on a staggering scale. The role of Western weapons? Massive. Western artillery in Ukrainian hands inflicted heavy losses on the Russian army.
Увага! Стрім розвідроти. Спостерігає рух 8 ББМ в нашому напрямку.
Зарядити, прийом.
And it was all thanks to some very interesting ammunition. Before we dive into the details, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. It doesn't just inspire our team, it also helps promote our videos. Thank you. Meat assault or meat wave attack is the unofficial name for the Russian offensive tactic. This is what soldiers call the attempt to breach defenses not through maneuver or artillery attrition, but by throwing sheer numbers of people at the problem. Here is how it looks. Massive assault columns, accompanied by armor, push forward one after another under heavy artillery fire. Often, they assault the exact same positions where the previous column was just wiped out. If they fail, the trick is repeated over and over until they manage to break through. A month, 6 months, a year. Every single time, this endless stream of Russian infantry found themselves under artillery fire. And if American dual-purpose improved conventional munitions fell on the Russians' heads, surviving was incredibly difficult. So, we are talking about 155mm DPICMs, or their European equivalents. Inside each shell, there are between 49 and 88 high-explosive dual-purpose submunitions, depending on the manufacturing country. When detonated in mid-air, a single shell showers an area the size of a football field with pre-formed shrapnel. They are equally effective at piercing 100mm armor on vehicles and mowing down infantry. Everything that moves gets turned into a colander, from armored vehicles and infantry to even the steppe hares. The Russians had never seen anything like this. The Ukrainians had not either, because the 152mm analogs that Ukrainian artillery possessed at the start of the war contain only 8 fragmentation submunitions, meaning significantly less. Ukraine received over 900 units of towed and self-propelled Western-style artillery that can fire these shells. Just imagine the losses the Russian army suffered during their meat attacks. But traditional high-explosive NATO standard shells also inflicted record casualties, thanks to their power and range, and the precision of Western artillery compensated for the ammunition shortage. Over the span of several months, the Russian army lost at least 1,000 soldiers killed every single day in these meat assaults. It was in the Donbass that the Russian army lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers. The undisputed champion of casualties is considered to be the 155th Separate Marine Brigade, which became a symbol of disaster. In March 2022, this brigade suffered a complete collapse near Kyiv. After this defeat, Putin awarded the brigade the honorary title of Guards. In November 2022, the brigade was thrown into a meat grinder near Vuhledar. Assaulting across open fields cost them 100 to 150 killed and wounded every single day. January and February 2023, Vuhledar again. The brigade was routed in the largest tank battle of the war, where over 130 pieces of heavy equipment were lost. In 2024, the brigade was bled dry once more during the assault on Vovchansk and the battles in the Kursk region. The brigade was replenished with criminals and sadists, who executed prisoners of war and beheaded them. Almost no one from the original active duty personnel at the start of the war survived. Throughout the course of the war, the brigade had to be reconstituted at least 8 times. But other Russian brigades suffered heavy losses as well. And when the death toll began to outpace the influx of new recruits and vehicle storage depots emptied out, the Russian generals shifted their tactics, practically abandoning vehicle columns and classic meat waves. Now they assault in tiny groups of 2 to 4 people on foot, day and night, with their radios turned off. They infiltrate through weak spots in the defense to gather in tree lines for subsequent strikes. The Ukrainians detect and eliminate them using domestically produced drones. Tanks, artillery, and other heavy equipment are kept far back from the front lines. The concept of the small sky emerged, which is where the primary struggle is taking place. Until there is a winner up there, it makes no sense for tanks and artillery to show up on the battlefield. The drone era in warfare is in full swing. Let us know in the comments, is this a unique feature of this war, or is it a global trend? And if you have thoughts on what the next phase of warfare will look like, and which weapons will take center stage, this is unique combat footage. High above Ukraine, a Russian helicopter is torn apart by a British air defense missile the world had almost forgotten. There's a certain irony in it, one that's guaranteed to bring a smile to every Ukrainian defender. The system was originally designed specifically to hunt Soviet and later Russian aircraft. 3 decades later, that same hunter has returned to the battlefield, facing its old enemies once again, this time in the skies over Ukraine. This is the Starstreak, a missile capable of accelerating to Mach 3, and according to some sources, even Mach 4. For it, flares are nothing more than a fireworks show before the kill. But there's one remarkable paradox surrounding this missile. Before 2022, the Starstreak had become almost forgotten. It never achieved the media fame of the FYM-92 Stinger or the 9K-38 Igla. For decades, it served with the British military without ever being fired at a real combat target. Then, after production contracts ended in the 2000s, manufacturing stopped altogether. And yet, within just a few months, Ukrainians turned this forgotten weapon into a nightmare for Russian aviation. The Mi-28 Night Hunter, the Ka-52 Alligator, the Mi-24 Hind, and even Russia's latest UAVs suddenly found themselves in the sights of a hunter the Russians never expected to face. So what is Starstreak really? A technological marvel? Or simply a weapon that finally met operators capable of unlocking its true potential?
Вона дротиками.
It's an outstanding missile, especially against aircraft. Flares don't help. Even if a helicopter dumps a whole stream of them, it doesn't matter. The missile rides a laser beam, so there's nothing to distract it. If the operator keeps the target in sight and tracks it, the kill is almost guaranteed.
So where did such an effective weapon against Russian air targets come from? Was there a secret behind it after all? Let's go back to the 1980s, at the height of the Cold War. British military planners watched Soviet aviation with growing concern. The Mi-24 Hind attack helicopter had become one of NATO's biggest nightmares. Flying at treetop level, it could hug the terrain, slip through defensive lines, and strike deep behind enemy positions. The man-portable air defense systems of that era simply couldn't react fast enough to intercept targets that were both fast and highly maneuverable. Britain needed a completely new kind of weapon, one that could fly at extreme speed, take down low-flying maneuvering targets, and, most importantly, operate without relying on the heat signature of an aircraft's engines. That requirement gave birth to the Starstreak.
Once a Starstreak locks onto an aircraft and the operator keeps it tracked, there's no escaping it. That aircraft isn't getting away.
Hit the like button if you like such a result and want to support our channel as well. Most manpads operate using a classic concept. The missile flies toward the target, reaches it, detonates, and destroys it with a blast and fragments. Starstreak works completely differently, and that is exactly what makes it unique. After launch, the missile accelerates to an insane speed of over 3,700 to 4,500 kilometers per hour. At a certain altitude, the missile body opens up.
So we have 3 darts at the front of Starstreak. When they're released from that rocket motor, they're independently guided, again with a laser beam, because Starstreak is a laser beam rider missile or hitile. So each of the darts is independently guided towards the target.
And this is not just some engineering curiosity. If one dart misses because the target makes a sharp maneuver, the other 2 still have a chance to hit. But if all 3 strike the aircraft almost at the same time, the damage can look like the helicopter was torn apart from the inside. When talking about this missile, it's also worth mentioning that Starstreak is used not only as a manpad system, but also as part of the Stormer air defense platform, where it becomes even more effective.
This is British equipment that was delivered to us, and you can see that this particular Stormer modification is equipped with an air defense missile system. In other words, its mission is air defense. It's designed to detect and engage aerial targets.
What makes it even more interesting is that the Stormer was originally designed specifically for a large-scale war scenario in Europe. TS mission was to move alongside British armored units and protect them from Soviet helicopters that were expected to strike at low altitude. Decades later, this vehicle found itself back in a war against the same Soviet aviation legacy, only this time in the skies over Ukraine.
The vehicle is actually pretty good. The handling is solid. Small holes and bumps are not a problem for it at all. Even a pothole around half a meter deep isn't really an issue. On hard surfaces, it moves very well, but when the ground gets a little softer or starts to melt, that's when it becomes more difficult for the vehicle. Overall, in terms of control and driving, it's excellent. You can install a day sight here, and we can operate it both during the day and at night. If needed, it can be swapped. But right now we installed the night vision system because it's better not to keep changing it all the time. We use one setup and work with it when required.
Now imagine what it's like to fight inside this machine. You are sitting inside a 13-ton aluminum box, flying across rough terrain, ignoring half-meter deep craters. Your armor is the only thing standing between you and enemy shrapnel and 14.5mm machine guns. There is no time to think. On the roof of the vehicle sit 8 deadly missiles. From the moment your sight locks onto a Russian helicopter to the missile launch, less than 5 seconds pass, faster than you can take a deep breath. You press the launch button, and 3 tungsten darts shoot into the sky.
This is our launcher. It has 2 missile pods, each with 4 launch rails. So the launcher carries 8 missiles ready to fire. They can engage targets at a range of up to 8 kilometers.
But the war in Ukraine forced this elite British vehicle into a role its creators probably never imagined, even in their worst nightmares. Instead of hunting only helicopters, it began taking down expensive Russian drones on a regular basis, from Orlan UAVs to Merlin reconnaissance drones. A machine designed to stop a Soviet air assault has, 40 years later, become one of the most dangerous drone hunters on the battlefield.
I've been working with it since March 2022, and from that time until today, our crew has destroyed 70 aerial targets, specifically drones. We're talking about UAVs like Zala, Supercam, Orlan, Merlin. There were Orlan 10s, Orlan 30s. These are larger reconnaissance drones, and they cost a lot of money.
Compared to other systems in service with the Ukrainian armed forces, the difference is especially noticeable. The American Stinger and the Soviet Igla work using infrared guidance. They look for the heat signature of an engine, but they can be fooled by thermal flares. The Polish Piorun has better protection against countermeasures, but it still relies on heat-seeking guidance. Starstreak is completely different. It uses laser beam riding guidance. The operator keeps the target in the sight, the laser creates a corridor, and the missile rides that beam straight to the target. It doesn't care about engine temperature, flare launches, or most electronic countermeasures. That is what makes it especially effective against low-flying Russian helicopters, aircraft that for decades relied on maneuverability and fake heat targets to survive. Subscribe to our channel to discover even more videos about the use of Western weapons in the Russia-Ukraine war, and let's continue. It was the highly effective use of Starstreak in Ukraine that led to its production being restarted for the first time in more than a decade. This is a clear example of how demand from Ukraine can revive production lines in the West that were once considered almost dead. However, restarting production will take more than a year. Supply chains need to be rebuilt. Restricted chemical materials must be replaced, and stockpiles of components need to be created again. On paper, it looks like the perfect weapon. So why didn't every army in the world buy it? The answer is simple, and complicated at the same time. Starstreak is a very demanding system. It is not a fire-and-forget weapon. The operator has to keep the laser aimed at the target until the moment of impact. It requires extreme concentration, fast reactions, and serious training. Many countries chose simpler and cheaper alternatives. But Ukrainian soldiers, driven by the need to defend their homeland, proved that with the right tactics and skill, even a system's weaknesses can become its greatest advantages. That is why, throughout the history of the Russian-Ukrainian war, there have also been cases where the operator failed to guide the missile onto the target, and the enemy helicopter managed to break away. Even with a system as capable as Starstreak, everything depends on the operator, keeping the target in sight, maintaining the laser track, and reacting in a matter of seconds. So is Starstreak a miracle weapon? Not exactly. It is a demanding system that requires true professionals behind it. The training may not take a very long time, but mastering the missile and using it effectively requires skill, focus, and experience.
On average, it takes about 1 month for a person to learn how to operate this system.
Just think about this. A regular Ukrainian manpads operator, sitting in a trench near Bakhmut or Robotyne, personally set in motion production lines at a military factory in Northern Ireland. The French defense giant Thalys was forced to urgently revive the Starstreak electronics production line in Belfast, which had been inactive for more than a decade. The West suddenly realized something important. A weapon they considered outdated can perform far beyond expectations in the hands of a motivated Ukrainian soldier. Yes, restarting production is difficult. It will take years, but the wheels of the European defense industry are already turning, and it was Ukrainians who pushed them into motion. On paper, the Gripen loses to Russia's Su fighters in almost every category. Yet this small Swedish jet may be the aircraft Russia fears the most. Why? The answer goes back to why the Gripen was built in the first place. It was designed specifically for an uneven fight against Soviet Su-27s over the Baltic Sea. When the Soviet Union unveiled its newest fighter at the Paris Air Show in 1989, Western aviation experts were stunned. A representative from McDonnell Douglas called the Su-27 extremely impressive, while CEO of Dassault Serge Dassault admitted, "The Soviet Union is becoming a real competitor for us." The arrival of the Su-27 changed the game, but Sweden found its answer: the JAS-39 Gripen. Military exercises showed that Gripen squadrons could survive the initial assault and keep fighting long enough for NATO reinforcements to arrive. More than 3 decades have passed. Now the battlefield is Ukraine. Inside Swedish Gripen's cockpits sit Ukrainian pilots who can't count on NATO's air power coming to the rescue. Their opponents are Russia's Su-35S and potentially the country's most advanced fighter, the Su-57. If you compare pure technical specifications, the Gripen comes up short in almost every major category. It's smaller and lighter because that's exactly what Sweden's defense doctrine demanded. Russia's Su fighters have greater range, a higher service ceiling, more powerful engines, and a larger combat radius. But paper tigers don't win wars. So what would a real encounter between the Gripen and Russia's frontline fighters actually look like? And will the realities of Ukraine's battlefield change the aircraft's effectiveness? That's exactly what we're about to break down. And at the end of the video, we'll look at the Gripen's first potential combat missions in Ukrainian skies. You won't want to miss it. But before we get to its weapons, we need to understand the tactics the Gripen was built around. After all, there's a huge difference between defending the Baltic while waiting for NATO support and fighting over Ukraine, where Russian AWACS aircraft, ground-based radar networks, and long-range SAMs control a large portion of the airspace. Years ago, Swedish military planners came to a simple conclusion. If the Soviet Union knows where all your aircraft are, the war could be over before the first dogfight even begins. So the Swedes turned the entire concept upside down. They made their air force invisible while it was still on the ground. They turned the entire country into one giant airbase. Highways became runways where fighters could land, refuel, rearm, and take off again. That's exactly why the Swedes made the Gripen so small. And that's precisely where its biggest advantage comes from. If you like this idea, hit the like button to support both our channel and the brilliant Swedish engineers who came up with it. Thanks to its compact size and low weight, the Gripen needs nothing more than a stretch of highway about 800 meters long, right in the middle of a forest. In fact, it's arguably the only modern fighter in the world that could comfortably take off from the access road leading to Camp David. To support this strategy, Sweden built camouflaged parking areas for Gripens in forests, alongside highways across the country, along with underground fuel storage sites and hidden ammunition depots. There are actually more of these locations than there are aircraft. Each jet is serviced by a small mobile crew consisting of 1 professional technician and 5 or 6 conscripts. So what does this strategy achieve? If the Russians don't know where your fighters are at any given moment, they can't destroy them. Their only options are either to spend enormous resources trying to find and strike them, or to cancel the attack altogether because the chances of success are simply too uncertain. But Ukraine isn't Sweden. There are no underground shelters spread across the country. Instead, Russian radars positioned along the border can scan hundreds of kilometers into Ukrainian airspace. So what happens then? Well, here's the surprising part. Ukraine's doctrine has in many ways gone even further than the Swedish concept. That's why, on the very first day of the full-scale invasion, most Russian missile strikes hit empty Ukrainian air bases. Dozens of missiles, virtually 0 results. That became one of the key reasons Russia's blitzkrieg failed. And it's also the main reason Russian aircraft still can't operate freely over Ukraine. So how and where do the Ukrainians hide their fighter jets? Ukraine's success with this strategy was made possible by an unexpected advantage: its Soviet legacy. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union turned Ukraine into its primary air fortress against NATO. Dozens of air bases with extensive infrastructure were built across the country. When Ukraine gained independence, it was forced to give up its strategic bombers and nuclear missiles. Over the years, the Air Force also shrank as aging, Obsolete aircraft were retired from service. But the airfields never disappeared. They were still there. And more importantly, there were far more airbases than the number of aircraft Ukraine still had. That's why, after Russia seized Crimea in 2014, Ukraine began modernizing this network and bringing reserve airfields back into service. So when Russia launched its massive missile strikes against Ukrainian air bases in February 2022, the fighters had already taken off and scattered across the country like the wind.
At one of the dispersal airfields we relocated to, there wasn't even a boarding ladder available, so I climbed onto the jet from the rear, first stepping onto the exhaust nozzle, then walking along the fuselage to reach the cockpit. That's how we lived through the first 5 days. No sleep, no rest. You just kept flying, mission after mission, sortie after sortie. That's how the war began for us.
In other words, while Sweden spent decades practicing dispersed operations during exercises, Ukraine's Air Force had to execute the same concept in real combat. But Sweden's highway strategy also proved useful. Even before the full-scale invasion, Ukraine's Su-27s and MiG-29s, the fighters that formed and still form the backbone of the Ukrainian Air Force, regularly practiced landing on public highways. So Ukraine has both: an extensive network of air bases and countless stretches of road that can serve as improvised runways. Ukrainian pilots have already become masters of guerrilla-style air operations while flying heavy Soviet fighter jets from the previous generation. Now imagine what happens when those same pilots get their hands on the Gripen, a fighter jet that was designed from day one for exactly this kind of guerrilla warfare. But surviving is only half the battle. What happens when the Gripen has to face Russia's most modern fighter jets in actual combat? Before we break down what a real encounter between the Gripen and Russia's fighters would look like, take a second to subscribe to the channel. We bring you in-depth coverage of modern weapons based on what they're actually doing on the battlefield. Thanks, we really appreciate it. Now then, modern air combat isn't a Hollywood dogfight. It starts off quietly, almost boring, but with every step, the tension keeps building. So let's break the engagement down phase by phase. Phase 1. The radar duel. As you can see, the radars carried by Russia's Su fighter jets are roughly 2 to 2.5 times more powerful than the Swedish system. Under ideal conditions, they can detect targets at distances of up to about 400 kilometers. So what do the Swedes do when they're facing aircraft with superior radar? They make their fighter harder to see. No, the Gripen CD that Ukraine is receiving isn't a stealth fighter. But Swedish engineers managed to reduce its radar cross-section to just 0.1 to 0.5 square meters. A big part of that comes from the extensive use of carbon fiber and composite materials, which make up roughly 1/3 of the aircraft's structure. Unlike metal, these materials reflect far less radar energy. On top of that, the leading edges of the wings, the vertical stabilizer, and the air intakes are coated with radar-absorbing paint. Even the canopy is covered with an ultra-thin layer of gold that helps deflect radar waves away from the aircraft. The rest of the reduction simply comes from one thing: the Gripen is small. The result? A Russian radar that can detect a large aircraft from as far as 400 kilometers may not spot a much smaller Gripen until it's roughly 150 kilometers away. Just like that, much of the radar advantage disappears. But here's the twist. In modern air combat, the pilot who turns on the radar first is often the one who loses. A fighter jet's radar pours out an enormous amount of energy. It's like switching on a flashlight in complete darkness. You can see whatever you're pointing at, but everyone else can see you too. That's why both the Gripen and Russia's Su fighter jets are fully capable of launching attacks without ever turning on their own radars. The side that wins is usually the one that gets targeting information first. Both aircraft can receive targeting data from external sensors, ground-based air defense radars, AWACS aircraft, or other fighter jets connected to the network. Once the target is illuminated, the fight enters. Phase 2. The missile launch. The missile duel between the Gripen and Russia's Su fighter jets would be something the world has never seen before. On one side is the Meteor, Europe's most advanced air-to-air missile. On the other is Russia's R-37M, known by NATO as the AA-13 Axe-Head, a missile that has dominated long-range aerial engagements with near impunity. But these missiles can only be compared side by side in a chart. In reality, they represent two completely different philosophies of air combat. Here's how that fight would unfold. Imagine both the Gripen and the Su receive warning in time. Each pilot knows the other is there. The Russian Su fires first because the R-37M simply has the longer reach. The AA-13 Axe-Head is a half-ton, solid-fuel missile. Its powerful booster accelerates it to nearly Mach 6 within seconds, and lofts it to an altitude of more than 25 kilometers. Once in the thin air of the stratosphere, it spends most of the flight gliding toward its target, conserving momentum. Only during the final approach, roughly 20 to 30 seconds before impact, does the missile activate its own active radar seeker to lock onto the target. So, does the Gripen have any chance of surviving? Yes, but only if the pilot knows about the launch long before that radar seeker turns on. Because the axe head is fired from such extreme distances, the Gripen pilot's primary objective is simple: force the missile to burn through all of its energy. The fighter jet immediately turns 180 degrees, lights the afterburner, and dives toward the ground. Can the Gripen really pull off maneuvers like that? Absolutely. The aircraft uses a close-coupled canard design, with small forward control surfaces working together with the main wing. This allows the jet to pitch its nose up instantly or snap into a completely different flight path in a fraction of a second. Unlike large, heavy fighter jets, the Gripen can change direction almost instantly while bleeding far less energy during aggressive maneuvers. For Ukraine, there's another major advantage. The Gripen is exceptionally stable at extremely low altitude. Right where the air is thickest and turbulence is at its worst, the Swedish fighter jet feels completely at home. Built to withstand up to 9 Gs, it can skim as low as about 30 meters above the ground while remaining fully controllable. Trying to follow the Gripen, the much heavier axe head is forced into massive high-G turns. Every violent correction drains more of the missile's speed and energy. By the time the exhausted missile reaches the target, the Gripen's electronic warfare system takes over. The aircraft carries one of the world's most capable built-in EW suites, the Saab Arexis. It's the Gripen's primary survival weapon. Arexis floods the missile with digital noise, manipulates radar returns, and creates false phantom targets. Blinded and confused, the missile locks onto empty space, flies harmlessly past the aircraft, and falls to the ground. How do we know this works? Ukrainian pilots perform very similar defensive maneuvers on their MiG-29s whenever an AA-13 axe head gets on their tail. They are the only pilots in the world using these tactics in actual combat. Until now, however, they had no comparable weapon to threaten the Russian Su fighter jets that launched those missiles. Now imagine the situation reversed. A Gripen pilot gets an opportunity to fire a meteor after a Russian Su enters the missile's engagement zone. The meteor works very differently. At shorter ranges, it locks onto the target immediately after launch and guides itself without requiring any outside assistance. But at maximum range, where the target has plenty of time to maneuver, the missile's own radar isn't enough. Instead, the meteor receives continuous mid-course updates from external radars and other network sensors, allowing it to track every change in the target's position. Only during the final seconds does the missile activate its own radar seeker and complete the attack autonomously. So, can the Russian Su escape the meteor with aggressive maneuvering alone? Practically speaking, no. The meteor was designed to maneuver. That's exactly what it does best. Conventional defensive moves, barrel rolls, hard turns, high-G breakaways simply don't work against the meteor. The meteor boasts a massive no-escape zone. Thanks to its throttleable ramjet engine, the missile can accelerate to around Mach 4, then adjust its speed to maximize maneuverability. Unlike traditional solid-fuel missiles that burn out early and coast toward the target, the meteor keeps producing thrust almost all the way to impact. In other words, it chases its target like a hunting dog pursuing its prey. That's exactly what it was designed to do. So how do we know? According to Global Defense Corp, during training in Alaska, a single Gripen reportedly achieved 5 simulated kills against U.S. Air Force F-16 Block 50s in close-range air combat. During the Loyal Arrow exercise in Sweden, one Gripen flying as the aggressor intercepted 3 U.S. Air Force F-15Cs. The result? 2 F-15 were considered shot down. The third escaped the meteor's engagement envelope only because its enormous engine power allowed it to outrun the missile. Over Ukraine, the Gripen will also play the role of the aggressor. Its first priority will be hunting down the Russian aircraft that carry Kalbis, the devastating winged glide bombs that have become one of Moscow's deadliest weapons. Day after day, Russian Su-35Ss and Su-34s fly high and fast, releasing these bombs from roughly 70 kilometers behind the front line. These heavy glide bombs flatten defensive positions, demolish reinforced concrete buildings, and erase entire city blocks. They kill not only Ukrainian soldiers at the front, but also civilians living far behind the battlefield. Ukraine's ground-based SAMs simply cannot engage Russian fighter jets effectively at those distances. To reach an aircraft operating 70 kilometers behind the front, both the radar and the launcher would have to be positioned almost on the front line itself, where scarce Western air defense systems immediately become targets for Russian Lancet loitering munitions, artillery, and anti-radiation missiles. As a result, Russian pilots have operated with a sense of near impunity, but that dominance may be about to hit a wall. The combination of the Gripen and the Meteor offers a unique solution because of the exceptional capabilities of both the Gripen CD and the missile itself. That's why this small Swedish fighter may be the aircraft Russia fears the most. And when Ukraine eventually receives the Gripen E, Russian fighter pilots may have to rethink their entire approach to air combat. But that's a story for another video. Let us know in the comments, would you like to see a full video about the Gripen E, the newest version of Sweden's fighter, and how it could change the course of the war? Military science hasn't yet coined a term for what the Ukrainian army is doing. Drones over Moscow every day, refineries and ports burning. Crimea is effectively under siege. The peninsula hasn't seen this kind of isolation from the air and sea in the entire war. Almost every day the Russians run into surprises.
We can see that Ukraine has seized the initiative on the battlefield, effectively frozen the front line, and delivered major strikes on targets inside the Russian Federation.
We're used to Ukraine defending itself. But how does it attack? Summer 2026. The front is stuck in a stalemate because of solid kill zones. So all the major events of this Russo-Ukrainian war aren't happening on the battlefield. They're happening in the rear. But the Russian army is still trying to push forward, so there's more happening behind their lines. That's where the fireworks are. But according to Russian army reports, everything's going to plan. Putin probably knows his military is lying to him, since he hears the air raid sirens, sometimes watches TV, and looks out the window. But the Russian president can't call it what it is. So what's actually happening? We broke these strikes down level by level, from FPV's kamikaze drone attacks all the way to the unconventional tools Ukrainians use to punch through one of the best air defense systems in the world and hit Moscow just miles from the Kremlin. The US, Europe, and China will probably all have to make major changes to their air defense concepts. This is about the tactics and signature weapons Ukrainians use across different operations. That's exactly what this video is about. Let's go! So, level 1 is tactical, the front edge. Most of the footage you see online is shot in these exact kill zones. Mostly it's footage from FPV's kamikaze drone cameras or thermal imagers on night bombers like the Vampire. But this footage isn't filmed to entertain viewers. For every verified strike video, units get combat bonus points credited through the E-Points system. That's what gamification of war looks like. But this isn't a game. Those points then get exchanged for new drones. In essence, it's an automatic system for distributing strike assets at the front, running alongside direct drone deliveries through the Ministry of Defense. There's no need to write reports or orders, no need to file paperwork on how munitions were used. Instead, the system just requires uploading a verified strike video. That video is effectively the report itself, just in video format. Then the unit simply trades its earned points for FPV's kamikaze drones, recon copters, or heavy night platforms, uses them to destroy the enemy, earns more points, and orders the next batch. This system completely eliminates paperwork bureaucracy and helps instantly distribute strike assets between units based on the intensity of combat and how effective their combat work actually is. It seems like no other army in the world uses this approach. That's genius, isn't it? BBC compares it to kill streaks in Call of Duty Modern Warfare. Ukrainian Minister Fedorov told Politico himself.
This is a mechanism that's changing the rules of war.
And a soldier from one of the Ukrainian units admitted to the NYT.
It's a brutal game because human lives have been turned into points.
Hit like if this approach blows your mind. And before we move to the next level, subscribe to our channel. Your likes and subscriptions help push our videos out there and keep our team motivated to make the next ones. Thanks. So let's keep flying. Level 2 is the deep tactical rear, up to 50 kilometers. Now under round-the-clock visual control from Recon UAVs. The most common killers here are large custom multi-rotor quadcopters, 13, 15, and 17-inch frames, capable of carrying anywhere from 2.5 to 8 kilograms of explosives, depending on the size. These platforms account for over 80% of all strikes at this range. But that warhead weight isn't enough to bring down fortifications or concrete buildings. But there's something that turns reinforced concrete into rubble. and literally tears fortified positions apart from the inside. And of course, anyone hiding in there too. To take out bridges, bunkers, and hardened command posts, guided bombs like the JDAMER and AASM Hammer step into the fight, packing powerful warheads. Thanks to escort from recon UAVs tracking how the mission unfolds, you're about to see exactly how these hellish little things work. A Ukrainian fighter jet releases the guided bomb from 40 to 70 kilometers away from the target, without entering Russian air defense range. After release, the bomb deploys its wings, and the AASM Hammer also fires up a rocket booster, after which it flies to the target using GPS and inertial navigation. Thanks to a warhead weighing anywhere from 250 to 900 kilograms depending on the version, and a speed of 1,000 kilometers per hour, the bomb punches through concrete and buries itself inside the structure. Only then does the delayed action fuse go off. The blast literally tears the bunker apart from the inside. The scariest part for the Russians is you never know when it's coming for you. So they try to push their most important sites even deeper into the rear. But even there's no peace for them. Level 3 of Ukrainian strikes is middle strikes. This isn't the gray zone anymore. It's the Russian rear up to 250 kilometers deep. But it's guarded by a thick wall of air defense and electronic warfare. How do Ukrainians break through one of the best systems in the world? And why do Russian air defense crews sometimes deliberately let Ukrainian drones through? Let's take it step by step. This is where you find camouflaged command posts and ammo depots, fuel storage sites and forward operating airfields, railway hubs and key roads, plus training camps and bases for Russian units. Because of air defense and electronic warfare, operations at this depth need special breakthrough tactics and different strike assets. First, we'll break down the breakthrough tactics, then we'll get into the strike assets. Relay drones go up into the sky if there's no other communication method planned. At the right moment, they need to maintain a link over 100 kilometers with the drones that manage to get past Russian air defense. Here's how the breakthrough works. The UAVs fly at extremely low altitude, over the sea or over land. They use complex terrain as cover, hiding in gullies, low ground, and riverbeds. Because of the curvature of the Earth and radar reflections off waves or ground clutter, Russian radars simply lose them from view. The swarm flies the main route completely autonomously, following preloaded coordinates. And here's the thing, often the Russians don't even try to shoot them down. The reason is, the flight plan is designed to attack any air defense system that gives away its own position. One drone from the swarm will just change course and dive straight into the crew. Nobody wants to die. Besides that, the Russians are often just saving their missiles. Part of the drone group carries electronic warfare gear and simulates the main strike, forcing enemy air defense to reveal its positions early and burn through its missiles. These decoy UAVs are produced by dozens of different volunteer engineering groups, private defense companies, and military units. Structurally, they're super cheap gliders with a Lüneburg lens mounted inside. Now we'll explain how this clever trick actually works. A Lüneburg lens is a special plastic sphere with a metal reflector inside it, which bends radio waves and focuses them, bouncing the signal straight back to the radar. Because of this, a small plastic drone that radar normally can't see starts reflecting signals just like a heavy strike platform. So while some Russian crews are reloading after shooting down a wave of decoys, and others are just tracking Ukrainian drones with their eyes, the main group of strike drones closes in on the targets. Before the attack, they climb up to get back in contact with their operators through the relay. This is needed to control the timing of the breakthrough, transmit telemetry, and confirm the start of the strike. But the final stage happens without GPS or an operator, guided by machine vision instead. Which variants get used specifically for the strike? American technology plays a role here too, but it wasn't Trump who supplied it. The hero of the last few weeks is the American UAV called the Hornet. According to estimates from German Bild's military correspondent Julian Röpke, one Hornet costs less than 5,000 euros. That's what happens when a former Google CEO gets involved. The Hornet's key feature is that it combines satellite and inertial optical navigation, an advanced optical electronic system for locking on and identifying targets using AI, plus the use of non-standard data transmission frequencies. Before the attack, the operator gets on-screen prompts about the type of targets detected and decides which one to strike. The Hornet's takeoff weight is around 15 kilograms, with a third of that weight being the warhead. That's enough to take out vehicles, lightly armored equipment, and other targets. But it's not enough to destroy a large depot or an underground command post. Ukrainians had needed a platform capable of carrying a massive payload for a long time. What emerged instead was a universal tool, one that can carry a lot of explosives and do it in different modes, autonomously and under operator control. So, to bring down fortified and large-scale Russian targets, they used the Ukrainian Tactical Strike, UAV, the Middle Strike Class FP2, developed by Firepoint. It's estimated to cost around $50,000. But what it's capable of is worth millions. The FP2 isn't hunting a single vehicle or a foxhole. This isn't just a drone anymore. It's a flying guided bomb. Its prey is headquarters, ammo depots, bridges, and concrete shelters. A group of Russian operators from the Rubicon unit ended up buried under that rubble for good. A big share of the FP2's most successful missions happen under cover of darkness. For that, it carries highly sensitive forward-facing night vision cameras or digital thermal imagers on board. This lets the operator manually guide the drone through the final phase. After this strike video, the Ukrainian unit got E-points, which they traded in for a new FP2. But this drone's range of operation isn't limited to land. Right now, you're watching a swarm attack by UAVs on a Russian frigate in Novorossiysk Bay. The ship's attempts to fend off the attack with air defense missiles turned out to be useless. Just a year ago, the FP2 could carry a high-explosive fragmentation warhead, weighing 105 kilograms out to a range of 200 kilometers. But in 2026, a new version showed up with a payload of up to 200 kilograms and a range of up to 370 kilometers. A separate version of the FP2 lets you mount, on its wings, unguided rocket pods, UARs, for assaulting positions. It's just insane versatility. This platform's potential probably hasn't even been fully unlocked yet. But for now, there are missions the FP2 just can't handle. And that's when ATACMS missiles come out against the most important and heavily defended targets on the battlefield. But not in 2026 because Ukraine's stockpile of these missiles has dropped to zero. And that's a problem. So what do Ukrainians do? Call in the Air Force again? Yes, but this time it's not bombs, it's a whole lot of expensive missiles. Missions using them look more like a chess combination, because almost every branch of the military and nearly the entire Air Force gets involved. And this is the next level. Level 4 strikes deep in the Russian rear against targets of strategic importance. And now you'll see how Ukrainians burn out the most expensive and advanced systems out there, the S-400 complexes. Let's look at a specific example of how Ukrainians are turning the Russian-occupied Crimean Peninsula into an island right now. The goal is to weaken the southern grouping of Russian forces, which relies on Crimea as a base for supplying food, fuel, and ammunition. So the first stage, blinding the eyes, starts with massed attacks by cheap drones like the Lyuti or Beaver, along with MALD decoy missiles, which force Russian air defense to switch on its radars and burn through expensive missiles. Russian air defense positions get exposed. What's next? So aircraft capable of carrying Storm Shadow/Scalp EG cruise missiles join the fight. In Ukraine's case, that means Su-24M bombers, thanks to a unique integration of pylons from British Tornado fighter jets. Before the flight, the target coordinates are loaded into the missile on the ground. And in the air, the aircraft acts as a lift and launch platform, after which the missile flies autonomously, using low altitude and terrain following. But under frontline conditions, you can't just hang the missiles on, fly in, and hit launch. They'll shoot you down. So besides the Storm Shadow carriers, Ukrainian Su-27 and MiG-29 fighters also go up, acting as direct escort and protection against Russian interceptors. But they're not flying empty either. Mounted on their pylons are AGM-88 HARMs, high-speed anti-radiation missiles, designed to find and destroy enemy radars. If this were a saloon in the Wild West instead of the endless sky, this shootout would look like a classic scene straight out of a Clint Eastwood film. But pilots aren't cowboys, and planes aren't revolvers. And instead of blind bullets, smart missiles that can see their own targets fly to the target. Whoever moves correctly wins. Whoever stands still loses. After air defense gets blinded and thrown into disarray, the Storm Shadows slip through the defensive lines unnoticed. They fly at an extremely low altitude, hugging the terrain. As it approaches the target, the missile makes a sharp upward maneuver so the seeker head can get a clear view of the target and pick the right angle for the attack. The angle of attack matters a lot. Thanks to this, Ukrainians were able to destroy the bridges connecting Crimea to occupied territory on the mainland. Storm Shadow/Scalp made the initial breach and stopped traffic. Then the heavy long-range Behemoth UAVs, a new generation platform, stepped into the fight. Thanks to a heavy warhead of up to 300 kilograms, they destroyed reinforced concrete decking and road slabs on the bridges, causing them to collapse. After blinding and disorganizing air defense and halting traffic over the bridges, the operation to turn the Crimean Peninsula into an island moved into its next phase. Ukrainians got the freedom to destroy military bases, ammo depots, and command posts. In early July, Ukrainian drones struck key elements of Crimea's power grid. Without a stable electricity supply, Russia's rail network and repair plants in Crimea grind to a halt. At the same time, a massive hunt began on Russian vessels in the Azov and Black Seas that deliver fuel to Crimea. The number of attacks is staggering, and the footage from these strikes looks like something out of Pearl Harbor. Crimea is gradually turning into a logistical island. The strategic goal, weakening the northern grouping of Russian forces, is being achieved. But the political goal, forcing Putin to end the war, is still far from being realized. Maybe the fifth level of strikes Ukrainians carry out on Russian territory will influence the Kremlin's decision. After all, these attacks are tearing down the economic foundation of the war, disrupting internal governance, and creating a direct threat to the regime. Systematic strikes on refineries, oil terminals, and compressor stations at a depth of 1,000 to 2,000 kilometers strip Russia of its main source of war financing and create fuel shortages on the domestic market. Attacks on microchip production plants, gunpowder facilities, and missile and UAV assembly shops disrupt the defense order and reduce Russia's technical edge on the front. Strikes on major railway hubs, bridges over the Volga, and strategic aviation airfields force Russia to spread its air defense assets thin, pulling them off the front line. Finally, strikes on Moscow. Beyond the economic damage, they also carry political consequences for pro-war figures in the Kremlin. How do Ukrainians pull off deep strikes without strategic stealth bombers, without tomahawks, and without ballistic missiles? To break through to a depth of 1,000 to 2,000 kilometers, Ukraine's defense forces follow a clear playbook. Let's break down every phase because it matters. If any single stage fails, the strike doesn't succeed. So phase 1 is reconnaissance. Satellite imagery and data from partisan movements inside Russia provide precise target coordinates. Refinery distillation columns, drone assembly shops, port equipment, substations, warehouses, and more. Phase 2 is the AIR defense breakthrough, carried out using the same scheme as with middle strikes. Hundreds of cheap decoy drones without warheads fly at different altitudes, forcing the Russians to switch on radars, burn through scarce missiles, and reveal their positions. Phase 3 is bypassing electronic warfare. The main strike group flies at low altitude, through riverbeds, ravines, and low ground, working around known electronic warfare and air defense points. The route gets adjusted in real time, mid-flight, via satellite link. Phase 4 is the strike. At 5 to 10 kilometers from the target, the drone shuts off its radio link, making it immune to jamming. The onboard optical AI doesn't identify the whole facility, just one specific component. For example, The distillation column, not the entire refinery. After that, the strike happens. What exactly do Ukrainians use for this? The main strike force for attacks deep in the Russian rear is the FP-1 drone and the FP-5 Flamingo missile, both from the Ukrainian company Firepoint, capable of reaching targets as far as 3,000 kilometers away. The FP-1 has a plywood frame and fiberglass skin. There's no landing gear here. It launches off a rail. A two-cylinder gasoline engine putting out 30 horsepower pushes the kamikaze drone up to 180 kilometers per hour. The attack happens under operator control, guiding the drone along its route. The warhead is 60 kilograms, with the option to bump it up to 120 kilograms at the cost of reduced range. It was the FP-1 that reached the Omsk refinery, located 2,500 kilometers from the Russian-Ukrainian border. But the main thing is the price, around $55,000. That makes it possible to launch hundreds of drones at once, and even if only a smaller fraction reaches the target, the result can still be counted as a success. The FP-5 Flamingo isn't a drone anymore. It's a full-blown heavy cruise missile, all of 14 meters long. This baby has a carbon fiber body and a turbojet aircraft engine that hauls a warhead of 1,000 to 1,150 kilograms out to a range of up to 3,000 kilometers. Because of its massive size and takeoff weight of over 6 tons, a unique launcher was developed for deploying and firing the Flamingo, based on multi-axle cargo platform. The missile flies using a terrain-following system at an altitude of just 15 to 30 meters, which makes it hard to detect. On top of that, the fully carbon fuselage barely reflects radio signals at all. The Flamingo's radar signature is about the same as a large bird's. So why don't Ukrainians use these en masse, hundreds at a time, to tear apart Russian infrastructure the way the Russians themselves do? That's a really good question. But because of how complex they are to manufacture, their high cost, and a shortage of foreign high-tech components, Ukraine can't build many of these missiles, unlike plywood drones like the FP-1, which get built by the hundreds every day. The Flamingo is a strategic level weapon, made one at a time. Maybe that's exactly why Putin keeps waging his aggressive war, while Ukraine keeps defending itself, even when it's the one attacking. Maybe the ballistic missiles set to enter service with Ukraine's defense forces this year will finally force the Kremlin to back down? Write in the comments, do you think Ukrainian ballistic missiles could stop Putin's aggression? And also tell us what surprises you most about the Ukrainian approach to waging war, the E-points traded for weapons on a special website that looks just like a regular online electronics store, or the sheer enthusiasm of Ukrainian volunteers, building weapons and systems without multi-million-dollar budgets. Into an assault without tanks and IFVs? How are armored trucks like the Max Pro, Mastiff, or Bushmaster breaking the stereotypes?
That was the first time we saw exactly what these vehicles are capable of.
Where the unparalleled Russian IFVs get blown to absolute pieces after hitting a mine. These once very unusual Mad Max-style machines work real miracles and continue the battle even completely without tires.
They would roll in actually. There were times when not a single wheel was left.
They are built to withstand the heaviest mines. And even the stuff that tanks are absolutely terrified of does not bother these armored vehicles too much.
You hear a small explosion, and that is it. The vehicle just keeps moving. I cannot count how many times I got hit by those FPVs, both heavy and light ones, and she saved my life and the infantry as well.
What exactly are MRAP class armored vehicles? And is there still a place for them on the modern battlefield?
Wheels were torn off, the axle was ripped out, the hood got folded up, but the people are alive.
American Max Pro and Oshkosh, British Mastiff, Canadian Senator, Australian Bushmaster, Turkish Kirpi. How do armored vehicles from all across the Western world compete with Ukrainian rivals for the right to be called combat-proven? What do you do when you need to go on the assault, but your unit doesn't have the right equipment, no tanks, no BMPs, and there's nobody to ask for help? That's right, you assault with whatever you've got on hand. Summer 2023. During the counteroffensive, Ukrainian Marines had to attack enemy positions in the south of Donetsk region in British Mastiff armored vehicles.
It was the assault on the settlement of Novodonetsk. Back then, our column of 10 Mastiffs went on the assault of this settlement. That's when we first saw what these vehicles are capable of.
Historically, it just turned out that Soviet, and now Russian, light armored vehicles are very vulnerable to explosive devices. A BMP-1 or BMP-2 hitting an anti-tank mine often leads to fatal consequences, both for the vehicle and for its crew along with the troops on board. Should we have expected greater resilience from a vehicle that seems, at first glance, less suited for direct fire contact? Turns out, yes.
When we drove up to the outskirts of the settlement, on the right and on the left, both vehicles, the Mastiffs, hit mines. But what's really notable, well, we found this out later, nobody in those vehicles got hurt. So we saw with our own eyes how the vehicle holds up against an anti-tank mine blast.
Hit like if you're also surprised that an armored truck can survive blasts that knock modern tanks out of action. So what exactly is this Mastiff with its unbelievable mine resistance? This vehicle belongs to the MRAP class. Mine resistant ambush protected.
3, 2, 1, 0!
Back in the middle of the 20th century, militaries of different countries ran into the mine threat, especially from irregular insurgent groups. The first MRAPs appeared in South Africa in the late 1970s. What made them different from ordinary armored vehicles? First and foremost, the design of the hull's underside.
Thanks to having a V-shaped hull like this, the blast wave gets dispersed and pushed out to the sides.
Later, the Americans joined the development of this type of vehicle. Why, you might ask? Surely the Bradley BMP couldn't handle Iraqi or Afghan guerrilla warfare. In reality, its combat capabilities often turned out to be overkill. So for lower intensity combat missions, they found a cheaper but effective alternative. That's how the American International Max Pro became one of the most mass-produced vehicles of this class. Later, many countries developed their own versions. Their essential features became the V-shaped hull and the shock-absorbing seat design, which absorbs the force of the blast. Did these design features affect the vehicle's appearance? Oh yes, they're hard to mistake for anything else. The shape of the hull and the drive to keep the crew as far as possible from the epicenter of a potential blast created a distinctive, recognizable silhouette, one that the military used to consider unacceptable. During the Cold War, the main means of fighting armored vehicles, artillery, and handheld anti-tank grenade launchers used unguided munitions. Their accuracy depended directly on the operator's skill. Because of this, designers tried to keep the silhouettes of tanks, BMPs, and BTRs as low as possible. Against this backdrop, MRAPs became the perfect target.
It's really tall. It genuinely drives out like a two-story barn. Only a blind man would miss it.
But with the appearance of guided anti-tank missiles, the difference shrank a lot. And now, in the age of FPV drones, it has basically disappeared. Instead, the height of these vehicles gives the crew an incomparably better view.
It's like we're riding on the second floor of a little house.
But for that better situational awareness, the Max Pro pays with worse stability. Because of its raised center of mass, it and other vehicles in its class risk flipping over on a rough road or in a sharp turn.
If we turn at high speed, it can lay over on its side. You see this angle gauge, and you can see how tilted the vehicle is right now. And if it's in the red zone, the vehicle can already tip over. At first, I used to lean into it like on a motorcycle, but then I got used to it.
What are the advantages of MRAPs besides mine protection? They're much cheaper than classic BMPs and BTRs, which makes them more widely produced. They're often built on the chassis of mass production civilian pickups or even trucks, like legendary Ford Super Duty. And although they were designed for specific missions rather than classic battles, the war in Ukraine broke the usual patterns, so the functions of these vehicles have diversified a lot.
It brings in troops, takes them out, evacuates the wounded. If the enemy is dug in, we drive up to their positions. The gunner swings the Browning around, and we start smoking them out little by little. Work it.
Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the most interesting and unexpected stuff about modern weapons in modern war. MRAPs are mostly armed with machine guns, either standard infantry ones or heavy caliber ones. But depending on what the customer wants, these can also be remotely controlled turrets or even combat modules.
Here you see the sight. You can fire in the daytime just as well as at night. It's like in a plane, basically. The joystick turns left, right, up, down. It's all just like a video game.
So, depending on how they're equipped, these vehicles can give the infantry some serious fire support.
Right, into the bushes, Tapa. Right, into the bushes. Our armored group with the guys pushed in on the Mastiff with a gunner in there, and there, I don't know how many Russians there were. 5 or 10 of them went in. The Mastiff drove up almost right against this house, tore everything apart in there. You can see on the video when it's all flying, the house just completely collapsed, and they got wiped out in there.
What else helps this class of armored vehicles be such versatile fighters in modern war? The vast majority of them are cutting-edge designs, fitted with the latest science and technology has to offer. Automatic transmissions, reinforced suspensions, and reliable armor protection. The Mastiff, for example, weighs nearly 20 tons, almost twice as much as the most common Russian BMPs, and by the designer's intent, it's supposed to protect its passengers even from tank rounds.
Thank God nobody's actually tested that on us. But I think it could probably hold up, yeah, it's really tough. And you know, it actually works. So many times these FPVs hit me, heavy ones and light ones, and it saved my life, and the infantry's too.
Paratrooper Serhai inspects his Max Pro after the battle. He's checking the damage from hits he didn't even notice during the fight.
Judging by the damage pattern, this really looks like 12.7mm caliber, basically a 50 caliber. It protects the personnel well during transport. You don't even feel fragments like that inside. Anything you can think of has already happened to it. FPVs or small caliber rounds, honestly, they hit the wall like mosquitoes, and the vehicle just keeps driving.
There's a particularly twisted satisfaction for the crew in watching enemy munitions hit the glass and walking away unharmed anyway.
The glass, if you look at it, it's about 100 millimeters. It looks like it's not that thick. Its weight is around 250 to 300 kilograms for one piece.
Seeing death with your own eyes, death that was hunting you but couldn't reach you, that's a refined kind of luxury.
You're just holding the wheel like this, and in some split second you see when this RPG's rocket hits your glass, and then the glass just turns into this kind of web, like a spider web, and that's it.
The only inconvenience, you can't see a thing through glass like that anymore, but that's probably not too high a price to pay for a saved life. This Max Pro, for example, took 12 hits like that without any critical consequences for the people inside. What other vehicle is capable of that?
The crew's alive, the gunner's alive, everybody's alive. If you take a BMP or take a BTR, if it takes 12 hits, it'll just burn up with the crew inside. Even if you hit it once with an RPG, everything inside will burn out. This vehicle holds up to that. I've been driving it for 2.5 years. I've been hit, I don't even know how many times, and I'm still alive.
Usually in MRAPs, the most protected area is exactly the crew compartment, the armored capsule where the people sit. But that doesn't mean the rest of the vehicle falls apart on the move. A punctured tire is basically not a problem at all. The run-flat system handles that easily.
There was a run where we drove out to the very edge position, dropped off the infantry, unloaded the ammo, all of that, and one of our wheels got punctured then. A mortar fragment hit it. The driver knew what to do, run flat kicked in right away, and we drove out of there.
Even if a tire gets torn off completely, the vehicle can still drive a good distance without it.
These wheels, they're fitted with run flat inserts. Inside, on the rim, there's this thick rubber piece. It's made for when the tire gets punctured. It can still do 30 kilometers. They thought it through well.
These bank vaults on wheels are incomparably cheaper and simpler to produce than classic BMPs and BTRs. So you might get the impression that they're the ones winning the race for the title of masters of the battlefield. In reality, that's not quite true. But in numbers, they really do outnumber the rest. The count of MRAPs in the war in Ukraine has long since gone into the thousands. Meanwhile, more or less modern BMPs barely reach the hundreds. Big ones and not so big ones. Heavy and lighter. American, Canadian, British, Australian, Turkish, and Polish. Plus a whole bunch of Ukrainian ones. All of them are competing in this terrible war for the right to be called combat-proven. Although for now, There's enough work to go around for everyone. So what do you think about the future of armored vehicles? Write to us in the comments. Will MRAPs ever fully take over the battlefield? Or will they always stay on backup duty? Stay safe and support Ukraine.